The drip started before the morning light fully reached the kitchen. It was slow, steady, and sharp enough to pull Emily Carter out of sleep. She stood in bare feet on the cold tile, staring at the sink as if it had chosen this moment on purpose. The house felt too quiet, not peaceful, just empty. Emily turned the handle tighter. The drip didn't stop. She laughed once, without humor, and rubbed her face. Mark had promised to look at it weeks ago. Mark had promised many things lately. None of them seemed to happen anymore. She checked the time. 6:12 a.m. Mark was already gone. He always left early now, kissed her cheek without really looking at her, and said, "We'll talk later." Later never came. By mid-morning, the cabinet under the sink was wet. Emily grabbed a towel, knelt down, and sighed. She didn't want to ask for help, but she was tired of waiting. She searched online and booked a local plumber. The name meant nothing to her then. Daniel Brooks. It's just another stranger doing a job. Then, doorbell rang at 11:47 a.m. Emily opened the door and paused. Daniel wasn't handsome in a loud way. He didn't try to impress. He just stood there with a small smile, tools in hand, calm and present. His eyes were kind, not curious, not rushed. "Hi," he said. "I'm here about the sink." She stepped aside and let him in. The house felt different the moment he crossed the doorway. As if sound returned to the rooms, he knelt under the sink and explained the problem in clear, simple words. A loose connection. Old pipes. Nothing serious. As he worked, Emily leaned against the counter, listening. Not because she cared about plumbing, but because his voice didn't fade into the background. It stayed. They talked a little. Where she lived, how long she'd been there. He mentioned growing up nearby, moving away, then coming back. No deep details, just enough to feel human. Daniel fixed the leak quickly. He wiped his hands and stood up. "All set," he said. "Should hold." Emily thanked him and took the receipt. As he turned to leave, he stopped and looked around once more. "Quiet place," he said. "Feels still." Emily swallowed. "Yes," she replied, "it is." Daniel nodded like he understood something she hadn't said. Then he left. The door closed. The silence rushed back in. Emily stood there longer than she meant to, staring at the sink. It no longer leaked. Everything was fine. And yet her chest felt tight. That night, Mark came home late again. He ate quickly, checked his phone, and said he was tired. Emily wanted to tell him about the plumber, about the sink, about the strange feeling she couldn't name. Instead, she said nothing. In bed, she stared at the ceiling and listened to Mark fall asleep. Her thoughts drifted back to the calm voice in the kitchen. She told herself it was just loneliness. It's just a moment. The next day, life moved fast. Errands, calls, small tasks that filled time but not space. Emily tried not to think about Daniel. She almost succeeded. Then the sink leaked again. Water spread under the cabinet, darker than before. Emily stared at it, heart racing. She knew she could call someone else. She knew she should. She didn't. When Daniel returned the next afternoon, he apologized. He explained the pipe behind the wall was older than expected. He'd need another day to fix it fully. "That's fine," Emily said quickly. While he worked, they talked more. About the town. About whether that never decided what it wanted to be. It's about nothing important and everything at once. Daniel didn't rush. He listened when she spoke. Really listened. Like her words mattered. She found herself telling him small truths. That she worked from home. That the house felt too big some days. That silence could be heavy. Daniel didn't judge. He just nodded. He finished for the day and packed his tools. Before leaving, he paused. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said. "We'll fix it for good." Emily watched him go, her heart beating faster than it should have. That night, Mark didn't come home at all. A text arrived close to midnight. Work. Ran late. He'd sleep at the office. Emily sat alone on the couch, lights off, listening to the quiet hum of the house. She thought about how strange it was that a broken sink had brought more conversation into her life than her marriage had. in months. The next morning, Daniel returned early. He worked behind the wall this time, deeper than before. Dust filled the air. Emily made coffee and offered him a cup. He smiled and accepted. They sat at the table for a moment, hands wrapped around warm mugs. Daniel spoke about his past. In detail, just enough to share. A marriage that ended slowly. Two people who stopped talking. Silence that grew until it filled every room. Emily felt her chest ache. The story sounded too familiar. She told him about Mark, about the distance, about waiting for conversations that never happened. Daniel listened. "You deserve to feel seen," he said quietly. The words landed harder than she expected. When the job was done, the sink was perfect. No drip, no leak, no sound at all. Daniel stood by the door, tools ready. "Take care, Emily," he said. "You too," she replied. He left. Emily leaned against the door after it closed, breathing slowly. Nothing had happened. Not really. Yet something had. Later that week, she saw him again by chance. A cafe downtown. A shared glance. A small smile. They talked briefly, like old friends who hadn't known each other long enough to miss one another. As Emily walked home, she realized something. She wasn't ready to admit out loud. The sink was fixed. Her life was not. And somewhere between the quiet house and the calm voice that listened, her willpower had started to crack. The pipe behind the wall had held for a few days, but the stress in Emily's chest hadn't. Every small creak of the house felt louder now, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. She tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on daily routines, laundry, grocery lists, making meals. Mark came home later and later, distracted, tired, sometimes ignoring her entirely. The silence between them had grown into a quiet rhythm she couldn't break. Then the sink leaked. Again, it wasn't dramatic, just a tiny drip, but to Emily, it was a sign. Her heart raced as she stared at the water spreading beneath the cabinet. She considered calling someone else. She wanted to. But when the doorbell rang the next morning, she didn't hesitate. It was Daniel. He stood there calmly, tools in hand, as if he belonged, though he had never lived here. "Looks like it's worse than I thought," said softly, reading her worry. "I'll need to take the cabinet apart to reach the main pipe." Emily stepped aside, holding her breath as he worked. The smell of sawdust filled the air, and the sound of metal against wood made her tense. But Daniel's voice cut through the tension. He talked quietly, making conversation about everyday things. Not heavy topics, not deep secrets. It's just enough to make Emily feel like she wasn't alone in the house. They talked about the neighborhood, the way the light shifted over the park in the morning, the best coffee shops in Portland. Small details, simple exchanges, but they carried weight. Emily laughed quietly at one of his jokes and realized she hadn't laughed freely in weeks. She felt something familiar stirring in her chest, a warmth, a pull she hadn't expected. Daniel asked about her work, about her life. She answered cautiously at first, then with more honesty than she had with anyone in months. She told him about Mark, how distant he had become, how he rarely noticed her anymore, how she sometimes felt invisible even in her own home. Daniel listened without interrupting, without offering empty advice. He simply listened, nodding, acknowledging her feelings. That alone felt like a lifeline. By mid-morning, Daniel had uncovered the main pipe. It was corroded, older than he expected. Fixing it would take a full day. Emily offered him lunch. He hesitated, then smiled. "Sure, thank you." They sat at the small kitchen table, sharing sandwiches and talking. No touches crossed boundaries. No flirtations were spoken aloud. But the atmosphere hummed with something unspoken, a connection forming quietly in the calm of shared time. Emily noticed the small things. The way Daniel's eyes followed her when she moved around the table, the way he laughed at a comment. She made the ease in his voice that made her feel safe. For the first time in months, she felt noticed. Not as a wife, not as a neighbor, not as a body moving through the house. just as herself. Mark called that afternoon late as usual with work emergencies. Emily tried to explain that the sink was being fixed, that Daniel was helping, but he barely listened. "Okay, thanks," he said, distracted, already back on a work call. He didn't ask who Daniel was, didn't thank him. Didn't notice Emily sitting at the table talking and laughing with someone who cared. When the call ended, Emily exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked at the man repairing her pipe, and the strange pull in her chest grew stronger. It wasn't physical, it was a longing, a desire to feel connected, understood, and seen. As Daniel worked, he shared a story about his own past. He'd been married once, years ago, and the marriage ended quietly, slowly, with small silences, growing into walls between them. Emily felt a pang of recognition. It mirrored her life with Mark in unsettling ways. The parallel made her ache. And yet it made her feel a strange sense of relief. She wasn't alone in experiencing this quiet heartbreak. By evening, the sink was finally repaired. Daniel cleaned up, packed his tools, and prepared to leave. He paused at the door, looking at her with those steady, kind eyes. "You deserve to be heard," he said quietly. "Everyone does." Emily's chest tightened. Nothing had happened between them. No lines had been crossed. Yet the words stayed in her mind, echoing long after he had left. The next few days were a blur. Emily found herself noticing Daniel everywhere, sometimes at the grocery store, sometimes at the cafe she frequented. She felt a strange thrill. Each time their eyes met, a warmth that reminded her of life beyond her lonely house. Every interaction was small, almost accidental, but it left her heart pounding. A gentle ache she couldn't ignore. Mark remained distant. He came home late, distracted, exhausted. Sometimes he barely spoke to her at all. Dinner went cold on the table. Conversations were shallow and rushed. Emily realized painfully that love didn't always fade with an argument or betrayal. Sometimes it disappeared quietly, replaced by silence and neglect. One afternoon, Emily went for a walk in the park. She ran into Daniel by chance. He waved, smiling, and she felt her stomach flip. They talked about ordinary things: dogs playing in the grass, the smell of coffee in the nearby cafe, the way the light fell on the trees. Simple things, but every word made her feel alive again. Every laugh reminded her how lonely she had been, returning home. Emily found Mark sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up, barely registering her presence, and said, "Long day." She nodded, feeling the sharp contrast between his distant presence and Daniel's attentive company, sitting at the kitchen table that night. Emily ran her hands over the smooth, repaired sink. The pipes were solid, the water flowed freely, but her heart felt fragile. She realized that the hardest part wasn't temptation. It wasn't even longing. It was knowing that she had begun to care for someone outside her marriage, not with actions, not with words, but in small, quiet ways that slowly took root. Days turned into weeks. Daniel continued to appear, sometimes for small repairs, sometimes by chance in the neighborhood. Each interaction strengthened the pull she felt, a gentle tug at her willpower, challenging her to confront feelings she had ignored for too long. Emily didn't cheat, she didn't cross the line. But the emotional bond she felt grew stronger with every conversation, every shared smile, every quiet moment where she felt truly seen. She loved Mark, but she realized something: he could no longer give her attention. Recognition, a sense of being heard. The story of the sink became the story of her heart. Small problem. A minor repair had opened a door she wasn't ready to face. Daniel hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't promised love or romance. He had simply listened, been kind, and treated her like a person worthy of attention. And that, Emily realized, was enough to start breaking her willpower. By the time Daniel fixed the last leak, Emily knew she was at a crossroads. She could continue living in the quiet, distant marriage she had grown accustomed to, or she could acknowledge the feelings stirring inside her. She could admit that she longed for connection, for someone who saw her, for the warmth she hadn't felt in months. Emily didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if her heart would lead her toward a new path or if she would remain in the life she had built. But she did know one thing with certainty. The drip of a small leak had changed everything. It had reminded her that even in ordinary lives, extraordinary feelings could emerge, that even in silence and neglect, the heart could awaken, and that noticing someone, truly noticing someone, could be as powerful as a storm. And so she stood at the kitchen sink one evening, running water through the repaired pipes, listening to the steady flow. The house was quiet, Mark still distant, the night stretching ahead of her. Emily's thoughts were not quiet. They were filled with questions, longing, and a subtle, aching awareness that life sometimes moved in unexpected ways, and sometimes the smallest repair could change everything. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew one thing: she would never feel invisible again.